This is a classic IQ bell curve, and it's basically how we map different ranges of human intelligence. You've got the dumb crowd here, the average folks in the middle, the really smart people up here, and then you've got ChatGPT, close to a genius, right? By the way, it went from dumb to almost Einstein level in just a few years. So, I wanna know, what happens if it just keeps getting smarter? So in this video, we are going to look at 4 major milestones AI development has ahead. But first, we should look at what the outcome might actually look like, because even though we might never reach the final stage of godlike artificial intelligence, what it could do to humanity either when we get there or along the way could be drastically different from anything we've experienced before. So first, we've got the camp arguing this whole thing will be more profound than fire. They see a world where AI becomes the ultimate engineer, designing cities we can't even imagine, ending the energy crisis, and running prosperous and fair economies. However, the second camp doesn't really argue any of this is impossible. They just worry it could kill us all along the way. Not out of malice, but simply because its goals might not match ours, or just because it could accidentally cause catastrophic damage while trying to optimize something we don't really care about. But how do we go from today's AI, which is pretty much just used for AI slop, to something that could wipe out everyone on Earth? And how do we know if we are actually heading in that direction? Between the release of GPT-3 in November 2022 and GPT-5 in 2025, a lot has changed. The most notable shift is the amount of investment, which jumped from millions to hundreds of billions. That's a lot, indeed. And if we look at the compute power inside data centers used to train these models, the charts only seem to go one way, up and to the right, meaning the time between breakthroughs keeps getting shorter. And that brings us to the first milestone ahead of us, which is the moment when AI starts designing better AIs. So the theory kinda goes like this. As soon as we get an AI smart enough to self-improve, each new version it designs will be more capable and more efficient than the last one. That creates a feedback loop of accelerating intelligence, which could go from linear to explosive almost overnight. And you might be surprised, but that is already happening to a small degree. In fact, you might have experienced it yourself. For example, if you have ever used one model to write a better prompt, then use that prompt to get better results from another, that is the system improving itself. But this milestone only gets us a little closer to the outcome everyone's worried about, and it's still not enough to be truly dangerous, so we need to push it a little further. The next big jump would be to something the researchers call artificial general intelligence, or AGI. This is the second milestone in our journey, and it refers to a system that can perform any intellectual task a human can across many different domains, with the ability to actually understand what it's doing. And here's where things could get a little confusing, because we already have ChatGPT, and if you ask it a question, it gives you kind of a coherent answer, which makes it seem like it kinda knows what it's doing, but that's actually not happening under the hood. You see, at this stage, artificial intelligence has simply built a massive mathematical map of how every word relates to every other word. And so, when it answers a question, it's simply using statistics to guess the next word while putting a sentence together. That makes the whole thing look like it knows what it's doing, but again, that's very far from being the truth. Take cooking for example. If you ask today's AI how to make lasagna, you'll find the closest shop where you can get the ingredients, give you a decent recipe, and maybe throw in a few tips on layering or seasoning. But it doesn't actually understand the chemistry happening in the dish, or how different ingredients could change the final flavor. It's just repeating patterns from millions of recipes it has seen before. AGI, however, is completely different. To begin with, it would engineer the perfect flavor, improvise a new technique, or even create a version of lasagna no human has ever imagined. We'll have to put that aside though, because this is where public opinion splits once again. The optimistic side is suggesting we'll reach AGI in the next few years. Their predictions range a bit, but usually land somewhere between 1 and 5 years. The skeptics, however, argue it's near impossible, and if it ever happens, it's going to take quite a while. Personally, I land somewhere in the middle, looking suspiciously at each side, and for valid reasons. First, the camp suggesting AGI is a year away is usually made of people highly invested in this technology, and the well-being of their personal finance, along with the companies they represent, often depends on the hype they build around it. Needless to say, many of them are involved in some grey area financing practices known as circular deals, which I made an entire video about, by the way. What became very clear when I dug into it is the use cases they hyped before have mostly delivered modest productivity gains and a skyrocketing pile of AI slop. Now, the skeptics say AGI is impossible because AI doesn't think the way humans do, which is true, but does it matter? I would actually argue it doesn't, because no one cares how a system thinks when it's playing chess. What matters is it can beat any human. The skeptics also claim some things will always be impossible for machines to do as well as people, but the past has proven that argument wrong again and again. Years ago, they said machines might learn numbers but would never do complex math. That was wrong. Then they said it might predict the next word but would never write a novel. That was wrong. And then they said it might see colors but would never paint. Well, that was wrong too. If AGI ever becomes a reality, the next milestone is artificial superintelligence, or ASI. And this is the level where a system isn't just as smart as an average human, but closer to the intelligence of all humanity combined. Naturally, this is where things could get super scary very quickly. At this point, get ready to witness what seems like magic, because it's really hard to overstate how insane ASI's capabilities would be. To wrap your head around it, imagine the brainpower of every human on Earth working together as one mind, then copying itself across dozens of servers and running non-stop around the clock. Okay, so what exactly, if anything at all, should really make us concerned about a superintelligent AI? Well, the issue isn't computers suddenly turning evil or becoming hostile. The real concern is competence, or more specifically, goal misalignment. A classic analogy people often use is the way we treat ants. If we decide to build a highway right where an anthill stands, we don't do that out of hatred. We're just addressing a traffic problem, and unfortunately, that doesn't end up well for the ants, does it? So, since an ASI would be exceptionally good at achieving its goals, our most critical task is to avoid becoming the anthill in its way. Okay, so how do we pull that off? How do we make sure we're actually aiming for the same goals? First of all, the good news. This is going to take a really long time. I'm talking decades, at least. But the way we are going to bake morality into these AIs has to start now, because that part might be even tougher to figure out. And when we are able to teach them our goals, the real question becomes, who gets to decide what these goals are? Do we vote on them? Do we let the political class decide? Do we let the tech bros who owns this system decide, or just go with what the machine wants? There's just no easy answer here. After all, if by a miracle we build such an incredible machine and we get it right, this could be the best thing that ever happens to humanity. Everything we enjoy about our civilization is a product of biological intelligence. And if artificial intelligence becomes powerful enough to solve our biggest problems, you see how that might turn out to be an incredible blessing. There is one more milestone after ASI though, and that is godlike AI. I'd love to tell you more about it, but no one can really define what it is or imagine what its capabilities might look like. So, I'm curious, how do you imagine that kind of thing?